We see this great work from new perspectives, giving Ophelia a voice as never heard before, all supported by Chris's energetic and literary prose. It is a joy to read. And so will you please join me now in welcoming Christopher Rush.
I'm nervous as hell. You know, it's last 8 or 9 years since I last addressed a literary audience at Charlotte Square, and 24 years since I last addressed a class. So which is 1999. So for an old git like me to attempt a rewriting of the world's greatest play, well, if not arrogance, is certainly optimism. It made me think of a story about optimism recounted by a medieval chronicler. It's about a peasant who'd fallen foul of the king for some fairly minor misdemeanor, for which, however, in those days he could be executed on the spot, and he asked the king for a reprieve. "All right," said to the king, I'll give you a minute. That suit you?" No. He said, "I want a year." And the king laughed. "A year? Why should I give you a year?" "I'll tell you why," said the peasant. "Give me a year, and in that year I'll teach your horse to talk." The king was intrigued and gave him the year's reprieve. But the peasant's friends protested afterwards. What are you going on about? You know this is nonsense. What do you think you're about?" "Listen," said the peasant, "I've got a whole year now that I didn't have before. A lot can happen in a year. The horse could die. The king could die. I could die. And who knows, maybe the horse will talk." Well, it's a wonderful example of optimism and pragmatism. So here I am, optimistically. I could see a number of old George Watson's College staff and I think pupils here, I don't know, I can't see all that far these days or hear all that well, not having yet reached the place of which the poet says that cold age deafs not there our ears, nor vapour dims our eyes. Well, maybe there's a cure for arthritis too, but I'll be looking forward to that. Anyway, I'd like to start off by telling you that I was lucky enough to be taught Shakespeare in the swinging 60s by a man who was definitely not a swinger, Professor George Ian Duthie, a formidably stooped little scholar, a begowned black owl with thick-rimmed spectacles and a sonorous delivery. He was an expert on Elizabethan calligraphy and an authority on the bad quarto of Hamlet. And whether he was lecturing to 600 students or simply addressing a colleague, he always accompanied his talk with large, sweeping waves of his right arm. It was 1964. One morning he honoured me after the lecture with an invitation to join him for coffee in the staff room at King's College, Aberdeen. And I found myself sitting across the table from another of our lecturers, the much younger and I have to say extremely attractive Dr. Isabel Murray. She was seated next to the professor and had her feet propped up on the edge of the table as she leaned back nonchalantly and sipped her coffee. 1964, did I say? It was the age of the miniskirt. And Dr. Murray, like all the female freshers, was wearing one, and the professor was expounding energetically on a notorious misprint in the 1623 First Folio edition of Henry V, in which the dying Falstaff, famously babbled o' green fields. "He didn't," said the professor, and he was explaining with great exactitude how the 18th century editor Tybalt had got it wrong. Falstaff did not babble, he merely talked of green fields. And it was a typically triumphant conclusion to the argument, in the course of which his right hand shot accidentally up the stocking thighs of Dr. Murray. The professor was, of course, completely oblivious to her thighs, but she equally naturally screamed and spilled some coffee. But Professor Duthie, without losing the thread of his sentence, and this was the bit that impressed me, without losing the thread of his sentence, turned to her and assured her in parentheses that my gesture was rhetorical and in no sense exploratory. Then he turned to his little audience and finished the point. You can see how it stayed with me. Rhetorical and in no sense exploratory. I do hope that the opposite is true of letters from Elsinore. Maybe it's a bit of both. But whatever it is, my first thanks must go to Leslie Afrosman and her team at Sparsile Books, who published this book, What I Wrote. I wrote to 40 publishers. 37 of them never replied. 2 did, expressing shock and horror that an author was approaching. You need an agent. You don't accept submissions from authors. Can you imagine the bizarre situation? A publisher actually talking to an author. And one of them, a junior assistant, sounded quite fearful that she was replying to me, we're not supposed to do it, you know. And I could picture her looking over her shoulder thinking her days were numbered. But thank you also to George and his team at Topping, wherever you are, George, for hosting this event and for selling the book, even though I'm not, as my publisher reminded me, a celebrity with fingernails longer than my intellect. My fingernails were bitten down in despair until Sparsile and Topping came along. Thank you both again. And an enormous appreciation to everyone here who has given up his or her evening. Now, you didn't expect an ancient schoolmaster to say their evening, did you? As if I'd negate centuries of grammar, pretending singular is plural, merely to please the wokes of this world. Please, oh please. So thank you for giving up your time to come and listen to me. It's also a joy to see 1 or 2 former pupils. I remarked to my wife Anna the other day that some among the first pupils I taught when I rolled up at Collington Road will now be hitting 70. The older ones that were in 6th year when I arrived there will now be past 70, which is it brought me up with a jolt. And I have to admit that recently I have heard the dreaded words in Princes Street and in Cameron Dolan in Morningside, Mr. Rush, you taught my grandfather. Hell, geez. Let's face it, when I'm going to cut here, but we did have some great times at George Watson's College for those who are here, and now I'm old, Master Shallow. Jesus, we have heard the chimes at midnight. The days that we have seen. Oh, the days that we have seen. Now, Hamlet, interestingly, never thought along those lines. He wasn't a sentimentalist. He was the opposite. He was a thinker and a realist. Maybe even something of a cold fish. More of a ghost, I often think, than a real guy of flesh and blood. He's nothing like his real as Falstaff. He never says, oh, I fancy a pint, or an hour in bed with a doll tear sheet. Nothing like that. It brings me to the question, why Hamlet? Well, the ghost in Hamlet has a very good motto. He says, brief, let me be. Well, he isn't actually all that brief when he gives his spiel, but I'll try to be as brief as I can. But I'm as dry as a bone, so if you excuse me. Oh, it's not a virgin, no. The impulse goes back to 1959, late in the year when I just turned 15 and had failed all my end of term school exams, my 4th form exams, and I was feeling pretty glum, mainly because I'd let my mother down. Our people were all fishermen in St. Monans, and she'd met my father when he was in the Navy, and so there was a strong chance I would go to sea. Well, I would definitely have got lost. Later when I took a donkey over to Cevennes, Katrina, my daughter, and my dad said, Dad, what? You go to the Cevennes with a donkey? You got lost in St. Andrews once, didn't you? And you were a grown man. However, there I was. My mother wanted me to excel academically, and I failed. And after flunking the exams, I sat slumped in a chair one night on my own, contemplating leaving school early and going to sea next morning. 5 years earlier, in 1954, a 12-inch black and white Bush television set had been wheeled in all its majesty into our living room at St. Monans, and it was switched on that night, as it was in those days. People not necessarily watching it, but television was so new, you know, so, oh, it's cold, so it's the television on, yeah? And there I was, slumped in my chair, thinking of of a life at sea when a voiceover came on at the start of a film. And the voiceover said, "This is the tragedy of a man who could not make up his mind." It was the 1948 Laurence Olivier film of Hamlet, and I was riveted, transfixed. I don't think I'd ever heard of Hamlet. I'd done Twelfth Night or Midsummer Night's Dream at school, and I didn't understand any of it, and yet here was perhaps the most complex and thought-provoking play of all time. And it just smashed me sideways. My life changed in those 90 minutes when I grew up. Why? Well, I won't go into the psychology. I said brief, let me be. But as the film finished, my mother came in from her night's work and said, "Mom, I don't want to go to school. I don't want to go to sea. I want to repeat my fourth form, stay on at school, take my hires." And she hesitated. She was a single earner at that point, and we were pretty hard up. She was a telephone operator in the tiny exchange just above the local fish and chip shop. And she was actually going down to Brighton the next day to her trade union conference. I think it was called the Union of Post Office and Telephone Workers. And she said, "Okay, let me think about it while I'm away. Is there anything you'd like me to bring you back?" There were no real bookshops in our village, and I said without hesitation, "Yes, the complete works of William Shakespeare." And this is it. Well, it's a bit worse for wear now, but this is printed in 1959, that very year. I started at page 1, The Tempest, read through 1,200 pages to Pericles 5 times in my repeated fourth year at school. The teachers thought I'd gone mad, and one teacher told me that the rector of the Whale Academy, as it was called, never failed to express his astonishment at what he called the boys' reformation. And it was all triggered by Hamlet. Now, did Shakespeare himself have a trigger for Hamlet? He had a son called Hamlet, we know. The name was interchangeable with Hamlet. And the boy had a twin. And the boy died not long before Shakespeare wrote the play. And in the same year, Shakespeare wrote Twelfth Night, about a girl whose apparently drowned twin brother is restored to her. He seemed to me to be fascinated by the sea's imagined magical power to give up its dead and to bring twins back together again. We don't know, but I do wonder if young Hamlet might have been drowned in the Avon, whose treacherous currents claimed lives every year. When he was 16, a young girl called Catherine Hamlet was drowned in the Avon, and an inquest was held. Catherine Hamlet, had she been let down by a lover? Was it suicide, or had she simply slipped? The doubt was there, and that doubt, and the girl's name, like the dead son's, found its way into Shakespeare's writing, and into Ophelia's watery, willowy death. Things were on Shakespeare's mind, obviously, and on mine. After more than 60 years thinking about him, and in particular about his Hamlet, Ophelia is one of the sweetest characters, but he never brings her alive in the play, except when she is insane and banging on about bed stuff, and particularly when she's dead and drowned, surrounded by wildflowers and images of life and procreation. In particular, the long purples, the phallic-shaped purple orchids whose roots resemble testicles. Well, it sounded to me like a long cry for help, and so I thought, well, you know what, I'm going to have a go, to boldly go and have a go at what Shakespeare was so good at, bringing people back up out of the water. The plan was to resurrect her, to give her the voice that she'd never had in the play, where she's silenced and sexually subjugated. Really there in Elsinore. He's elsewhere. His mind is elsewhere. His mind is constantly questing beyond the visible. He's rather like an actor rather than a real person, as I said earlier. An actor, moreover, who's discontented with the role he's been given, and is the role of revenger, and is quarrelling with it, and with himself and with everyone else, except Horatio. The prince is on another planet. So I thought, well, let's bring him back to Earth and let him hear what other people think of him. And hence the book. Now that was the easy bit, that little introduction. The hard part is what to choose to read from a story that has so many moods and voices and versions of reality. In the graveyard scene of the play, the first gravedigger says to his fellow devil, "Hey, get thee to Johann and fetch me a stoup of liquor. Digging graves is thirsty work. Time you get back with my flagon, I'll have this here grave dug." Now, Shakespeare was a great one for anachronisms, Either he didn't care or he just enjoyed breaking the rules. So I decided to follow the master and have some fun injecting my own anachronisms into Elsinore. Some submerged, some half hidden. If you read the book, you'll see them. Others outrageously out there. Allusions to Gillian Flynn, Suzanne Moore, Lonnie Donegan, John Cleese, Simon and Garfunkel, and others. Johann's place. I thought, what about calling it the Diggers, where we used to sneak out from Watson's and get a pint or two? But then I thought, well, no. What people outside Edinburgh what would the Diggers mean to them? And then I had another thought. One of my favourite chansonneurs since the late 60s was and still is the linguistically inspired and richly accomplished Yorkshireman Jake Thackeray. Jake Thackeray, once a school teacher actually, and when rewriting the graveyard scene I listened again to his morose little number Down at the Black Swan. Well, Gravedigger says get down to Johann's, and I thought, the Black Swan? And down at the Black Swan, Jake drowns his sorrows for a lost love in the tavern of that name. And I imagined Ophelia imagining Hamlet going down from the graveyard and regretting her, not at Johann's, but at Jake's place. Jake's being, of course, a good old slang Elizabethan word for a privy, or the Black Swan. After all, there had to be more than one pub in Elsinore. And the song, and this is beyond optimism, because I'm going to sing it. Down at the Black Swan we'll go sing our love song. We'll sit, we'll booze, we've got nothing to lose. We've lost it all, lost it all. Down at the Black Swan we'll drink hard, we'll drink strong, drink deep, drink long, drink our heads off, drink on. Now that she's gone, now she's gone, give us another pint, one more pint, landlord of your very, very best bitter beer. We'll be here all night. We're on a bender, we're tanking up. We don't care, we don't go home tonight. There's nobody there. Now she's gone, now she's gone, now she's gone. Go to bed early, girl, go with a book. Go alone, go easy, your life is your own. Don't lose it all, lose it all. Think on me kindly, but don't come and find me. I'm lost, I've lost heart and eyes are both crossed. Now that she's gone, now she's gone. We've had a skinful, we've supped some stuff. We don't care, we don't go home tonight. There's nobody there. Now she's gone, now she's gone, now she's gone. And so that's how I had it at the proof stage until Leslie, my publisher there, said, copyright? Permissions? Oh, now I suspect that if I'd written to Jake, he'd have handed it over for the price of a pint, but sadly Jake had already written his last will and testament and had actually sung it before passing on. He is dead and gone, lady. He is dead and gone. He was a lapsed Catholic who had attended what he called a Jesuit flogging school. And contemplated the priesthood and taught at Catholic schools in France. And when entering the pearly gates, he hoped to be greeted not by the Virgin Mary, but by a Bloody Mary. But having lost his faith, neither was likely. But he did receive a request before he died from the Catholic Herald, for which he was a columnist. He wanted a lyric. This is his letter, where he replies indignantly. Dear editor, a bloke called James from your office rang to ask if I'd immediately write 50 to 60 words about unrequited love for your paper for St. Valentine's Day. He also said that I would not be paid. Here are exactly 60 unpaid for words as asked, and I think I've got them dead right. So would you ask your sub-editor to please not shag them up? If you do not like the words exactly as they are, then you've got a wastepaper basket, I suppose. Also, you Catholic heralders should, don't you think, at least offer to pay us others for what you ask us to do? Well, despite his anger at being asked to do unpaid work at a time when he had huge financial difficulties, he took the time to write the polished piece you've just heard, sung in a not very polished way by me. But there was a copyright problem. Now the Ukrainian artist who let me use the striking image of Ophelia for this front cover charged me €100, £90. Great for permission. Jake's affairs had passed from the family into a music company, and they informed me that they would charge me a minimum of £350 for permission, not to use the song, just to use the word, to quote the words of the song. £350, and only if they approved of the context surrounding the lyric. A book about Hamlet. Well, that could take us at least 3 months deliberation. So you know what I said? I'll write my own song, and Jake's place can still be in the Black Swan, even though not all that long ago the Black Bitch in Linlithgow was deemed to be a racist appellation, but we'll not go into all that. One of the themes of my novel, if I could call it my novel, is that the dead will not stay dead. You don't need ghosts to prove that, as we all know, or skulls suddenly popping out of the soil like Yorick's. Our dead are all around us every day, in our minds and hearts. There isn't a day goes by when my mother doesn't flit into my thinking, or my first wife, and all our other loved ones. And at the end of the play, Hamlet begs Horatio not to be more an anti-Roman than a Dane, but to stay alive to tell his story. And my Horatio says, what? Tell his story? His story? The man is surrounded by corpses, and there are others scattered in his wake, people who'd still be alive if he'd acted differently, or if he'd acted at all. And so, in the novel, while fulfilling his friend's last request and telling his story, Horatio decided to let everyone have his or her say. All right, I'll say it. Their say. And I thought, well, as that I can have them back for an Elsinore encore as ghosts, when they can speak freely, unfettered by flesh and blood. The ghost in Hamlet makes no fewer than 5 appearances in the play. So I thought, well, I'm going to give Ophelia at least a repeat performance and let the book end with her where she never was, in the spotlights, or in the limelight, if you like, or in the light denied her in the play, in which she's, in a sense, gaslighted. Be warned, 40 minutes would be. So a little extract, just, and it's enter the ghost of Ophelia. What does Ophelia have to say? A long way from home. You could say that, except that there never was a home, not really. There was a busy father and an absent brother, and yes, there was a motherless child. We did sometimes feel that our hopes were in vain, until he came along. Did you love me then? You've read the letters, Horatio's notes. What do you think? He importuned me with love, as he say. Oh yes, but lots of men importune ladies whom they don't really love. It's what men do. He's whispered sweet nothings to a sweet nothing, the sweet nothing he wanted me to be. The idea mattered to him, always the idea, not the thing itself. He sent me letters, so as you know, and he wrote me poems. Doubt thou the stars are fire. I didn't doubt that the stars were fire. I didn't doubt that they weren't. I never even thought about the stars or cared about them. I cared for him. I cared for him. How much did he care about me? He cared more for Horatio, I think, his best friend, his only friend. Why was he so friendless? When you have that sort of special friend, you share things, don't you? Intimate things that you wouldn't share with anyone else. Intimate. So I asked Horatio, did he ever allude to me in their talk? And here, the play is my evidence. No, never once mentions her to Horatio. Not one mention. And did you notice he never once referred to me in his last moments on earth, by which time I'd been long blotted out of his life, airbrushed from his emotions. And the country matters? Country matters? Was there any country he cared for, if I may sound so crude? Maybe his mother's. As for me, the long purples were as close as I got to penetration, and they were dead men's fingers. Let's face it, apart from a few murmured pleasantries to Horatio, The only real word of love he ever uttered was spoken to a skull. Alas, poor Yorick. Alas. Why alas? Yorick was fortunate. He was favoured. Here hung those lips that I have kissed I know not how oft. How many times? He'd lost count. He never kissed me once. Never mind country matters. But he got it right when he likened my dad to old Jephthah. Sacrifice your daughter to the system, whatever that may be, and let her go out and bewail her virginity. She died a damsel, virgo intacta. I had plenty of that to bewail. He even advised me to become the bride of Christ. And if not the living death of nullification or nullification, then the hell of the brothel, as I was such a little whore, a virgin whore. Either way, a negation of life, and the prison door to procreation, a fitting sentence for the gone girl of Elsinore. Nobody even missed me at the end. Follow my mother. Wretched queen, adieu. The rest is silence. Rosenkrantz and Guildenstern are dead. Go, bid soldiers shoot. Not a word about the gone girl. And on it goes. I'm not going to keep you. Oh, I had to rewrite the song. I won't sing it, but here's my version of Jake's. Down at the Black Swan, I'll drink till I'm half gone. I'm back from the bilboes, I'm bending both elbows, and I'll quaff to forget that once she was mine. You can hear the allusions to Jake's song in this one. Down at old Jake's place, I'll tank up at piss pace, I'll swill and I'll souse and bib and carouse, with a skinful forget that she was so divine. Down at Jake's boozer, I'll booze like a loser, I'll sup up and swig and drink like a pig, and I'll slug to forget she was sweeter than wine. She came to her lover, the watery cover, slipped into the bed, ungendered, unwed, and sang to forget how she'd pined to be mine. Go to your grave, girl, lie like a lost pearl, under the green sheets, while the rude priest bleats. We mustn't forget that you crushed the true vine. So landlord, pour a generous measure, drinking's now mine only pleasure. Life is woeful on the wagon, fill me up another flagon. Drown my sorrows till I'm tender, here I'm on an all-night bender. Now that she's gone, now she's gone, now she's gone. And I'll probably just finish up the... She comes in again. I'm not going to read the whole thing because you've been very patient. Too late, my friends. They're in their graves already, all of them. Death's all right. Nothing better. Nothing tragic about death. Not if you deserve it, or if you want it, if it's what you live for. If life's lost its meaning for you, and the urge to exist has gone. But who am I in the end? The nonentity of Elsinore. What does she know? Not much. I never pretended to know much. I wasn't given a chance. I do know one thing though, and I know it now for sure, surer than before. That gravedigger, he got it right in his own muddy way, even if he did get his Latin wrong, and I expect Ian will be telling me maybe I'll be getting my Latin wrong now. Se offendendo instead of se defendendo, the verdict in justifiable homicide. At least that gravedigger wasn't far from the truth when he said it. She murdered herself for her own protection. She killed herself in self-defense. Now, that's the reading. And if I can hold you a minute longer, I'm sorry, it's like the ending of a Beethoven symphony. He just couldn't bring himself to get there. But to repeat one of the themes of the book, the dead will not stay dead. And I know that there will barely be a human being among us here tonight who doesn't feel sad that so many of our old friends are absent without leave because they have no choice but to leave. It makes me not only sad enough but mad enough to punish you with, well, our song, a little number from the Great War in which so many perished. Adieu la vie, adieu l'amour, adieu toutes les femmes, c'est bien fini, c'est pour toujours, Dieu, cette guerre infâme. C'est à quand, sur les plateaux, qu'ils ont laissé leur peau, car ils sont tous condamnés, ce sont les sacrifiés. Adieu la vie, adieu l'amour, adieu toutes les femmes, and so on it goes. Even if it reflects the spirit of Hamlet and the novel, apologies for the touch of melancholy. Dylan Thomas tells us that we shouldn't be melancholic. Old age should rage, burn, burn and rage at close of day. And though Gérard Depardieu tells us in one of his greatest films, Tous les matins du monde sont sans retour, every morning of the world dawns only once. I prefer to think that for us, every morning will keep on dawning. And so, if I can call you this, oh, mes beaux amis, what a life we've all led, haven't we? I'll say it again. We've heard the chimes at midnight. Maybe we'll hear them tonight again. Even those of us who retreat to the nearest tavern. Anyone who wishes can come up to Liberton Bray and have a glass of wine with Anna and myself. And so good night unto you all. Travel hopefully, friends, and may the force be with you.